On July 5th, 2012, one of the most devastating storms to hit the Great Smoky Mountains National Park hit. As you can imagine, the 4th of July holiday meant that the park was packed to the gills with visitors, which made the park ripe for tragedy. A typical overcast day in the park, filled with heat and humidity, would fool parkgoers into a false sense of normalcy on the day the storm hit. The Cades Cove campground's 159 campsites were full, just as the Smokemont, Elkmont, and Abrams Creek campgrounds were. Those who weren't camping were filling the parking lots and sides of the roads with their cars. The entire park was overflowing with visitors. As the National Weather Service station in Morristown, Tennessee studied their monitors, they noticed a group of thunderstorms building over the Ohio Valley. Normally, these storms would run their course in due time, but this week, they would converge, creating a supermassive storm with the potential to bring death and despair. In the early afternoon of July 5th, the storm had grown to 250 miles in length and was on a crash course for the national park as it floated south. An hour later, around 3 p.m., a thunderstorm watch was issued for the national park from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. While this might sound alarming to some, a thunderstorm watch happens nearly every single summer day in the South, so many people simply ignored it. At 6 p.m., the National Weather Service would change the thunderstorm watch to a warning, which means that you need to take shelter immediately. Well, by the time the warning was issued, the storm had already crossed the boundaries into the park, which left virtually no time for anyone to prepare, even the rangers. When the storm reached the park, it was blowing winds at 70 miles per hour, just a few miles per hour shy of hurricane force winds. Trees were being uprooted and their limbs were being turned into javelins. Meteorologists were sounding off on TV and radio about the storm, which they began calling a derecho. A derecho is known for the particularly straight winds that it produces, as compared to the cyclone-type winds of a tornado. A derecho is formed when cooled air that is denser than the storm front creates a downburst of wind as it merges with winds on the Earth's surface. The difference of temperature creates a massive wall of wind that is known to produce more thunderstorms and thus more wind. A derecho will approach as a black shelf cloud. Once this cloud reaches over, the derecho can do extreme damage. The reason for this is because not all areas of the storm are equal. Due to the nature of the derecho's ability to spawn smaller, more extreme microbursts, areas less than a mile wide can experience extremely fast winds and devastating damage. Extrapolate this to the larger storm, which was over 250 miles in length, and there are hundreds of areas that might experience these super bursts of air. Over the next 8 hours of the storm, the National Park Service would answer 300 calls, many of them coming in several at a time. One of the first devastating attacks the storm let out was on the radio repeater on top of Look Rock Tower. The radio repeater is vital for communication because it allows signals to be amplified so that officials can use their radios to check in, no matter where they are in the park. This meant that many of the calls that the rangers received from both people in distress and their own rangers would come in as static, jumbled messes, virtually unable to decipher. A lot of the initial damage was coming in on the western side of the park, which meant that Cades Cove could quickly become a death trap for many people. Little River Road was hit hard too, as one family had a tree fall on their car as they tried to escape the storm. Another family felt the brunt of a rock slide mid-storm. These were some of the lucky ones. The story of two couples enjoying a simple day on motorcycles begins with them returning to their RVs in Wares Valley as fast as possible. Ultimately, the couple split up, with one couple taking their RV on US 321 and the other trying to escape via the Little River Road. Rain was pouring so hard for the couple on Little River Road that they were going at a crawling speed. They decided to turn around and abandon their escape, but when they did, disaster struck. The derecho had flung a small tree like a javelin through the air, and it struck the RV, piercing the driver and killing him instantly. Somehow, the passenger was able to escape with minor injuries. This death was the first of the night, but it would not be the last. Witnesses stranded in the campgrounds at the time of the storm tell a horrifying story. The storm hit with little warning, and turned what was a typical summer day into a war zone. The winds sounded like jet planes bursting through the sound barrier as projectiles were hurled all around. Tents were flying. Meanwhile, a family at a popular swimming hole on Cooper Road Trail were about to experience the worst night of their lives. When the storm hit, they exited the creek to seek shelter on the bank. They noticed that the bank was lined with trees and the creek was void of them, so the family made the decision to wade back into the creek in hopes of avoiding downed trees. They weren't so lucky. Just as they got back into the water, a massive oak tree fell into the creek directly on top of them, pinning their 7-year-old girl underwater. The child's grandfather worked to free her. Eventually he did, but she was not breathing. With 2 broken arms, the child's mother was able to resuscitate her on the banks of the creek. While the child had suffered a broken pelvis and arm, she was nonetheless alive. As they tended to the child, they noticed the child's father was still pinned under the tree. Unable to move him, the family took the child back to the campground to receive medical attention and to hopefully find help for the father. A good Samaritan rushed back to the scene to help, but was met with a discouraging sight. The man was halfway underwater, completely immobile, and any movement rocketed his pain receptors. The man had suffered a punctured lung, 9 broken ribs, and 2 fractured vertebrae in his back. The Good Samaritan, named Rudel, knew that this man would drown if the creek rose in the slightest, as the water was already reaching his chin. Sometimes, in a tough situation like this, you just can't help someone until more help arrives. This was the case for the father. Rudel knew this and began to turn his attention to another injured woman on the bank of the river. This woman had been hit in the chest by the tree and was having trouble breathing. After doing what he could to keep her awake, Rudel noticed she had slipped away, and despite CPR, she passed on the bank. The first emergency responders that arrived to aid the victims on Abrams Creek was a massive man of a firefighter, Mike McClung. The 6'5", 300-pound behemoth of a man had just crawled over and under thousands of downed trees with his cousin at his side to reach the swimming hole. Unfortunately, the one tool they needed most was not with them, a chainsaw. An hour after their initial arrival, the highway department arrived with a backhoe and a crew of chainsaw operators. But for that hour, it was the work of random community members bringing their own chainsaws that began to work to free the victims. Back at the campground, the 7-year-old with severe injuries was struggling to stay awake. No one knew how long the shivering girl had left. Just as options were dwindling, Carol Cooper arrived in her Chevy Tahoe. She put the child in the back of her car and made it to a clearing before realizing that the storm had made it impossible for people to leave the park due to so many downed trees. That's when she pressed the OnStar button in her car, fully expecting no one to answer. Amazingly, a dispatcher answered and would go on to serve as a vital connection between on-the-ground responders and those at the ranger stations. Responders were now able to use the Tahoe to order ambulances to the incident. The Tahoe was from then on the central command station of operations after the storm. At Abrams Creek, firefighter McClung had continued to assess the situation on scene while his cousin had commandeered a pickup truck that could serve as a makeshift ambulance. As McClung went to help the father pinned in the creek, he could only see a nose, mouth, and some hair above the water. With help, McClung was able to free the man, who then transported him to the nearest ranger station so the medics could reach him. The injured child and her father were airlifted to UT Medical Center around 10 p.m. As midnight neared, the sweet relief of ambulances arrived in droves to relieve those who had been saving and preserving as many lives as possible. The only reason they were able to reach Cades Cove was because of the efforts of teams of civilian chainsaws clearing the roads on their way. By the time the ambulances arrived, the weather had settled down enough to begin the process of tending to those who had passed and those who were still alive. But the problem of communication still weighed heavily on crews, as they had no way to let the outside world know what was going on and what they needed. Then, by some strike of luck, a landline phone was found with a dial tone that allowed rangers on scene to start communicating what had happened and what needed to happen next. Visitors in the park were allowed to call their families to let them know they were okay, and those who needed to stay a night were given proper shelter in the park. After midnight, now July 6th, the last of the ambulances had transported injured civilians out of the park. As crews searched more of the backcountry for injured or dead, they found none. While 2 people tragically lost their lives in the storm, all the others who were injured recovered, at least physically. While the main story nationwide was that of a devastating derecho that destroyed much of the park's western edge, the real story was that of the responders and civilians who preserved and saved lives that night.